I thought taking my wife out for a night of dancing would bring us closer, but I never expected her to leave with someone else. When a Hollywood star asked her to dance, she didn't hesitate, and that was just the beginning of the nightmare that would change everything. Abby has always had a deep love for movies. Making her happy was as simple as taking her to see a good film, but not just any film. It had to be from one of four genres: animation, action, adventure, or drama. Romance, however, was her absolute favorite. She was drawn to romantic films, often labeled as girly, and had a particular fondness for actors like Tom Torino, Matt Wright, and Brad Talbot. They were her favorites, and any movie starring them was an automatic win in her book. Our first date was at a screening of Sleep in Seattle. Abby was never particularly enamored with Tom Hanks, but she adored the story. Years later, she confessed that this was the night she truly fell in love with me. Why exactly that movie had such an impact on her is still a mystery to me, even after 12 years of marriage. Abby is just as breathtaking today as she was back then. With her tall, slender frame, she has always carried herself with an effortless grace. Her dark emerald green eyes stand out against her striking hair, and when she gets dressed up, she turns heads without even trying. As for me, I'm John Sawyer. I suppose I don't look too bad myself, tall, of a solid build, with sandy-colored hair and blue eyes. People often told us we made a beautiful couple. Back in my student days, I never had trouble meeting women, but when I met Abby, something shifted. I knew she was the one I wanted by my side for the rest of my life. I believe she felt the same way about me. We met in high school and fell deeply in love, and our bond only grew stronger throughout our 4 years in college. 3 months after graduation, we made it official and tied the knot. Abby isn't just my wife, she's my soulmate, my everything. Life without her is unimaginable. While our 2 daughters bring us endless joy, they also make spontaneity a bit of a challenge. Tonight was supposed to be special, a rare evening just for the 2 of us. We had planned a night out dancing in the city with 3 other couples, followed by drinks and a late stay at a hotel downtown. My parents had kindly agreed to watch the girls, and we were looking forward to a carefree, unforgettable night. But the moment we arrived at the nightclub, an odd feeling crept over me, a sense of unease I couldn't quite explain. I couldn't quite put my finger on the source of my unease. The women seemed distracted by something, and one of the men carried himself with a smugness that rubbed me the wrong way. Of the 3 couples we were with, I was particularly fond of George and Helen, as well as Bob and Anna. George worked as a software engineer, while Helen managed their household, raising 3 children. Bob owned a successful plumbing business, and Anna handled the administrative side of things. They were both great couples, easygoing, genuine, and enjoyable company. The only pair I never quite warmed up to was Chad and Thelma. To be fair, I had no real issues with Thelma, she was pleasant enough, but Chad had always rubbed me the wrong way. Something about him just felt off. Unfortunately, since Abby and Thelma had been college roommates and remained close friends over the years, I had little choice but to tolerate Chad's presence. From what I gathered, Chad had some connection to the film industry. I think he once mentioned being an agent or something along those lines, though it was clear he wasn't particularly successful. Meanwhile, Thelma held a high-paying job as a representative for a pharmaceutical company, which from the outside, seemed to be the primary source of their income. As for me, I worked as a financial advisor at a well-known brokerage firm. The early years had been tough, but now business was thriving. I had more clients than I could comfortably manage. In this industry, once you reach a certain threshold, you're expected to mentor new employees and gradually transfer some of your clients to them. Naturally, I kept the most profitable accounts for myself. I had already gone through this process twice before, and it was looking like I'd be doing it again soon. Right now, my career is in a great place. I've worked hard to build a strong client base and things are only looking up. As for Abby, she started her professional life as an administrative assistant to Mike Winston, the executive vice president of a regional bank. After we had our 2 daughters just a year apart, she made the decision to stay home with them until our youngest, Stacy, started 1st grade. It was a choice we both agreed on, and I admired her dedication to our family. Once Stacy was old enough, an unexpected opportunity presented itself. Mike, who had recently been promoted to president of the bank, approached Abby with an offer for a part-time position. He needed someone he trusted, and Abby was at the top of his list. She took some time to consider the offer, and I fully supported her decision to return to work. Now, if you're thinking that I made a mistake in encouraging Abby to take this job and that she's having an affair with her boss, let me stop you right there. You'd be way off. Mike is 62 years old, bald, and most importantly, completely devoted to his wife and 5 children. There was absolutely nothing to worry about when it came to him. Despite the nagging sense of unease I had earlier, I decided to push it aside. Tonight was meant to be special, an evening of dancing with Abby and a romantic night together afterward. As the event got underway, we greeted a few familiar couples. Attending these dance nights regularly often led to running into pleasant acquaintances, and tonight was no exception. At one point, we even ran into an old college friend, Fred Abbott, and his wife Brenda. As we caught up, Abby and the others eventually made their way over to our table. Just as the music started, a sudden commotion at the entrance caught everyone's attention. A small crowd had gathered, whispering and craning their necks to get a better look. Right beside me, Brenda suddenly began breathing heavily, her face filled with shock. "What's wrong?" Fred asked, noticing her reaction. Brenda barely took her eyes off the entrance. "Don't you recognize him?" she exclaimed. Curious, I turned to look, only to see an extraordinarily handsome man standing at the door. He was a little shorter than I expected, but there was no denying his striking presence. Fred and I exchanged confused glances, both of us clearly out of the loop. "That's Brad Batt." Brenda practically squealed, her excitement evident. "He and his fiancée Rita Summers are two of the hottest stars in Hollywood right now." Fred turned his head to get a better look. I wonder if Rita's here too." Brenda playfully rolled her eyes. "John, on a scale of 1 to 10, Rita Summers is a solid 15, she teased before giving her husband a light slap on the arm. "Typical of you to think about that." I chuckled at their exchange, but my attention remained on Brad. He happened to be one of Abby's favorite actors, and I briefly considered getting his autograph for her. That thought, however, was quickly overshadowed by what happened next. To my complete shock, Brad walked directly over to our table and, without a moment's hesitation, asked my wife to dance. What stunned me even more was how readily Abby agreed. She didn't look at me, didn't ask if I minded, she just took his hand and followed him onto the dance floor as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I clenched my jaw, irritation bubbling inside me as I watched them move together under the dim lights. 4 songs passed and she was still dancing with him, completely oblivious to my growing frustration. Annoyed, I slumped back into my chair, feeling like an outsider in my own evening. By the time the 5th song started, I had reached my limit. I stood up, ready to intervene, but just as I moved forward, Chad's glass suddenly tipped over, and he let out a sharp hiss of pain. "John, could you help me?" he asked, holding up his hand, which now had a small but steady stream of blood. I hesitated, my eyes darting between Abby, still dancing with Brad, and Chad, who was waiting for assistance. Instead of confronting my wife, I sighed and decided to help Chad to the men's room. The cut turned out to be minor. I helped him wash the wound and wrapped it up, but before we could leave, we heard a commotion outside. As we stepped back into the main room, things had taken a dramatic turn. Fred was already stepping in, trying to defuse the situation, but it was clear tensions had boiled over. Thelma was screaming and Chad looked furious. Before I could fully process what was happening, a scuffle broke out, and in the chaos, someone called the police. Within 10 minutes, officers arrived, questioning everyone involved. Fred stuck to his version of events and I backed him up, making sure to emphasize that Chad had provoked the confrontation. Meanwhile, a crowd had gathered, whispering amongst themselves as the night unraveled into something none of us had anticipated. I silently prayed that Abby wasn't one of Brad's latest conquests, but Fred wasn't so optimistic. "Prepare for the worst," he warned me. His words sent a cold wave through my chest. I didn't know what to do or how to process what was happening. Trying to stay composed, I assured Fred that I would be fine, though I wasn't entirely convinced of that myself. As I made my way back to our table, I pulled out my phone and called Abby. The call rang once before going straight to voicemail. I tried again, same result. When I finally returned to my seat, the atmosphere had shifted. The other wives looked guilty, while their husbands grumbled in disapproval. It was clear that the night had gone completely off the rails. And then, just as the remaining couples were heading back to the hotel, Abby appeared. She was practically glowing, a broad smile lighting up her face, until she saw my expression. The moment her eyes met mine, the excitement vanished. "We didn't do anything," she blurted out, almost breathless. "We just talked all night." Her words tumbled out quickly as if she had rehearsed them. "I understand that I should have consulted you first, but I knew you would say no." I stood there, frozen, my emotions locked somewhere between disbelief and anger. "You know how much I love movies," she continued, her voice pleading. "Brad Talbot has been one of my favorite actors for years. Last night was like a fairy tale, it was surreal but nothing bad happened, John. My love for you remains unshakable." I stared at her, feeling the heat rise in my chest, my patience slipping away. My jaw clenched, and before I could stop myself, the words came out. I want you to pack your things and go to your parents. Her eyes widened in shock. John, please, I heard you, I cut her off, my voice low but sharp. But what you did was completely unacceptable. You left with another man, danced with him all night, ignored my calls, and only came back when you were done living your little fantasy. Tears welled in her eyes as she shook her head. I thought you'd understand once you knew the truth. Nothing inappropriate happened, I swear. We have to find a way to get through this. Think about our daughters. I let out a bitter laugh. Oh, now you're thinking about them? Were you thinking about Stacy and Gail when you walked out of that club with a movie star? I hissed. Tell me, Abby, how would you feel if one day one of our girls did something like this to her husband? Her face drained of color. It was like my words had hit her harder than anything else I could have said. And then just like that she broke down. I'm so sorry, John, she whispered, her voice cracking as tears streamed down her face. I never imagined it would turn into such a mess. I wasn't thinking. I didn't know what to believe anymore. Abby insisted that nothing happened, that it was all innocent. Could she be telling the truth? Maybe. But my gut told me otherwise. She wasn't being completely honest. I could feel it. Could I find the strength to forgive her and move on? Maybe, if it had remained just between us and our close friends as she claimed. But now that the entire situation had exploded all over the internet, there was no way to salvage our relationship. A part of me entertained the idea of revenge, on both Abby and Brad, but I couldn't come up with a plan that didn't seem petty or self-destructive. I was stuck, drowning in anger and betrayal, unsure of what to do next. And then, out of nowhere, I received a phone call. Hello, is this John Sawyer? A woman's voice asked. Yes, I answered cautiously. My name is Rita Summers, she said. I'm Brad Talbot's fiancée. I stiffened at the mention of his name. So she had found out too. Yes, I know who he is, I replied, impatience creeping into my tone. I just wanted this conversation to be over. Do you love your wife? Rita asked bluntly. I let out a heavy sigh. No matter what's happened, yes, I still love her, I admitted. But given everything that's unfolded, I don't see how we can rebuild our marriage. There was a brief silence before Rita spoke again, her voice measured and careful. If I had a way to help you save your marriage, and fix my relationship with Brad, would you be interested? My heart pounded in my chest. Was this even possible? I needed to sit down to think, but something inside me was desperate for a solution. Yes, I finally said. I want to hear what you have in mind. Rita took a deep breath before continuing. I've been with Brad for years, and let's just say I know his history. I treated our relationship with caution, but after our engagement, he promised me he had changed, that he had given up his past ways. When I confronted him about your wife, he insisted that nothing inappropriate had happened. She hesitated before adding, unfortunately, I can't confirm whether that's true. Her voice wavered, and I could tell she was struggling with the same doubts that were eating away at me. Yes, my wife claims the same, I admitted. And the thought of losing her is unbearable, but I don't know how to trust her again. If you're willing to try, I have an idea, Rita said. What do you need me to do? I asked. As soon as Abby gets home, have lunch with her. I'll meet with Brad separately and then we'll go over everything together. There are still a few details I need to work out. Even though I wasn't entirely convinced about this plan, I had no better alternatives. Fine, I agreed. Let's see what you have in mind. I decided to take control of the situation before Abby could. First, I called my parents and told them I would be picking up the girls in 30 minutes. Then, I reached out to my administrative assistant, Johnny, and let her know I'd be working remotely for the next week. I needed time, to think, to process, to figure out my next move. When I arrived at my parents' house, the girls had a lot of questions, but their excitement quickly grew when I told them we were heading to Chuck E. Cheese. For a few hours, I put everything aside and focused on my daughters, watching them laugh, play games, and enjoy themselves like nothing was wrong. At least for them, things were still normal. When we finally got home, the phone rang as soon as we stepped inside. The number was unfamiliar, so I ignored it. But it kept ringing every 5 minutes until I finally had enough and unplugged it from the network. At around 6 p.m., my cell phone rang. This time it was Abby. Why haven't you been answering? She snapped the moment I picked up. Because it's just reporters calling about your alleged affair, I replied flatly, already tired of the conversation before it had even begun. There was a brief silence. Then she spoke, her voice softer but strained. John, are you really going to take the girls and leave? If that's what you want, I said, keeping my tone even as I prepared to head out. No. Abby interjected, panic creeping into her voice. Let's sit down and talk. Let's figure this out. While she spoke, the girls were already packing their bags, their excitement still intact as Abby told them they'd be visiting their grandparents. After a tense silence, Abby turned to me, uncertainty in her eyes. What do we do now? I sighed, running a hand over my face. I wish I knew, I admitted. Right now I feel hurt, confused, and angry. Do you have any suggestions on how we're supposed to handle this? She hesitated. The media attention, the way things are going. If you fight for custody, the court may see you as the more stable parent. Please, John, don't escalate this. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to fix our relationship. I let out a bitter laugh. Fix it? Abby, I don't even know where to begin with that. She exhaled shakily. Why don't we continue this conversation over lunch next Sunday when you pick up the girls? Her voice carried a hint of desperation, but also a warning. If you insist on going for full custody, she added with a sharper tone, I won't tolerate this uncertainty. It's not good for them. If you keep this up, I'll have no choice but to start the divorce process immediately. I clenched my jaw. The woman who had been in tears earlier was now threatening me. Then, as if flipping a switch, her voice changed again, cool, controlled. Join me for dinner at Zoom at 7 o'clock. Formal dress code. Before I could respond, she ended the call. I was stunned when Rita informed me that she had made a reservation at Zoom, the most elite restaurant in the city. Securing a table there typically required weeks of planning, and the prices were outrageously high. The fact that she had arranged it on such short notice only deepened my curiosity. I arrived promptly at 7 p.m. and was immediately escorted to a private dining room in the back of the restaurant. Despite the table being set for only two, the room was lavishly decorated, velvet drapes, soft candlelight, and an air of exclusivity that made it clear this was no ordinary meeting. As much as I appreciated the setting, I was far more interested in what Rita had to say. I was desperate for a way to save my marriage but completely lost on how to make that happen. After dinner, Rita leaned back in her chair, studying me with a thoughtful expression before finally speaking. Let's start with the real culprit here, John, she said, a knowing smile playing on her lips. This entire fiasco was orchestrated by none other than the insidious Chad Tompkins. I frowned. Chad? What do you mean? He pretends to be a big-shot film agent, Rita explained, swirling the wine in her glass. But in reality, he's nothing more than a glorified pimp. I stared at her in disbelief. He sets up situations where unsuspecting people, especially married women, end up in compromising situations with celebrities, she continued. It's a well-crafted scheme and unfortunately, your wife got caught up in it. The revelation left me reeling. Was Abby just another target in some twisted setup? The idea didn't erase my anger, but it did shift some of my perspective. At the very least, it meant there would be consequences for Chad's actions. Still, my primary concern was Abby's intentions. Did she willingly fall into this trap or was she manipulated? What's your plan? I asked, eager to understand where this was leading. Rita took a measured breath before replying. Before I explain, I want to make one thing clear, John. You are an attractive man, intelligent and charismatic. Your wife made a terrible mistake jeopardizing your marriage. She gave me a small, almost teasing smile. If things had been different, I might have been intrigued myself. I exhaled sharply, offering a polite but firm response. That's very kind of you, but let's be honest, we live in completely different worlds. Her smirk lingered, but she nodded. Fair enough. She then straightened, her demeanor turning serious. Here's what I propose. You tell your wife that I am your client, and you continue meeting with her under the pretense of discussing reconciliation. You should allow her to return home after 2 weeks, but during that time refrain from any intimacy. Let her feel the weight of her mistake. I nodded, listening intently. Then, on October 15th, Rita continued, both of you should attend the charity gala I've been deeply involved with for years. Most people don't know about my connection to the event. I usually make an appearance every 2 years, but this year is special. I raised an eyebrow. And how exactly does this help? Rita leaned in slightly, her voice lowering. Because by then the real truth will come to light. And I intend to make sure your wife, and the rest of the world, sees it for what it really is. I will be there, Rita continued, her voice steady. And you and Abby will attend as a couple. As always, the gala will feature a charity auction where wealthy patrons bid on extravagant experiences or opportunities. Traditionally, married couples attend together, and if a husband is put up for auction, his wife is expected to place the winning bid. She paused, studying my reaction before adding, but this year something different will happen. A married man will be auctioned off, and his wife will not place a bid. I frowned, still trying to piece together what she was getting at. And what exactly is the point of that? Rita smiled, a knowing glint in her eye. The subsequent events will not go unnoticed, she said simply. I kept my expression neutral, though my mind was racing. She seemed so sure of herself, as if this one moment would expose something crucial. Sensing my hesitation, Rita giggled and patted my hand lightly. "Don't worry, John," she reassured me. "You're the married man who will be auctioned." For a moment I just stared at her. "What?" She smirked. "The auction will test your wife's true feelings. If Abby truly wants to save your marriage, she won't hesitate to claim you as hers. But if she doesn't?" Rita let her words trail off, allowing the implication to sink in. In the days leading up to the gala, I continued meeting with Abby under the pretense of discussing our relationship. These interactions were mostly polite, sometimes even warm, but there was still a distance between us. Rita and I also spent time together, often in casual settings where she and Brad would exchange witty banter over dinner. It was obvious that she cared about him deeply, but at the same time she wasn't blind to his flaws. She made it clear, if he continued his reckless behavior, she wouldn't hesitate to leave. A week before the gala, I allowed Abby to return home, but I made it clear that I would be staying in the guest room. She looked disappointed, but she didn't argue. Then the night of the charity event finally arrived. We walked into the grand ballroom together, dressed in formal attire. Abby was stunning in an elegant evening gown, but I couldn't help but compare the energy between us to what I had seen between Rita and Brad. Abby had been trying to reconnect with me, but was it out of guilt, or because she truly wanted to fix what was broken? As we settled in at our table, the auctioneer took the stage. The bidding began with high-end vacation packages and luxury items, but I knew the real test was yet to come. At one point, I leaned toward Abby and gestured toward the auction table. "It's a charity event, and we didn't have to pay for tickets," I said casually. "How about I sign up and you bid on me?" Abby giggled, though it didn't sound as carefree as Rita's laugh had earlier. "I don't have any money on me," she admitted, holding up her small designer clutch. "I didn't bring my wallet, it wouldn't fit in this bag." She said it playfully, but something about her tone made my stomach twist. She was following Rita's script exactly. And now all I had to do was wait and see what happened next. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a stack of bills, handing them to Abby. "Here's $1,000, I said, keeping my voice even. "You probably won't have to spend more than $50, but since it's for charity, place at least a $200 bid." She hesitated for just a second before nodding. The gala was buzzing with excitement, not just because of the high-profile attendees, but also the celebrities who had shown up to support the cause. As the auction officially began, all the male participants were called to the stage. I smiled at Abby before heading toward the exit, making my way behind the curtain where the rest of the men were waiting. There were 24 participants in total, and I had a strong suspicion that Rita had arranged for me to go last. As I stood backstage watching the bids climb higher and higher, I started to feel uneasy. By the time I stepped onto the stage, the total funds raised had already surpassed $300,000. I had expected the auction to be lively, but I never imagined just how competitive it would get. "Our final participant is a local resident," the auctioneer announced, and the crowd erupted into applause. At first, the bidding started modestly. A few hundred, then 1,000. I assumed it would settle somewhere in the low thousands, but to my surprise the numbers kept climbing. $5,000. $10,000. $15,000. At $25,000 I began to feel uneasy. This was far beyond what I had anticipated. I cast a quick glance toward Abby, expecting her to step in, but she remained frozen in her seat, gripping her purse tightly. Then from the far corner of the room, a familiar voice rang out. $100,000. The room fell into stunned silence. It wasn't just the amount that shocked people, it was the identity of the bidder. Rita Summers. The crowd burst into cheers and applause. Cameras flashed, guests whispered to one another, and even the auctioneer took a moment to regain his composure before officially closing the bid. Abby sat there motionless, her face pale, her mouth slightly open. She hadn't even tried. I had my answer. The night was a blur after that. The gala ended, and before I knew it, I found myself at Rita's house. Or more accurately, one of her houses. Back when I was growing up, this used to be my neighborhood, before life took me in a different direction. Brad, ironically, had once lived right across the street. It was nearly 3 a.m. when we arrived. The house was enormous, spanning 3 floors, easily twice the size of a standard home. As we walked inside, Rita casually mentioned that she owned 6 properties. 1 in Hollywood, 1 in New York, 1 in Florida, 2 in Europe, and 1 in South America. I settled into the living room while she poured me a drink. The weight of the evening pressed down on me, the betrayal, the humiliation, the realization that Abby hadn't fought for me at all. And yet here I was, sitting in a mansion, drinking whiskey, across from one of the most stunning women I had ever met. The pain of my wife's actions lingered, but as Rita sat beside me, her presence was impossible to ignore. We locked eyes, and in that moment something shifted. We kissed. It wasn't planned, it wasn't forced, it just happened. For 20 minutes we sat on that couch, wrapped up in each other, the heat between us undeniable. The feeling of being wanted, of being desired by someone like her, was intoxicating. Then without a word she took my hand and led me upstairs. As we stepped into her bedroom, Rita turned to face me, a playful smirk on her lips. Slowly she began to move, her body swaying to an unheard rhythm. She was dancing for me. And at that moment I knew, nothing would ever be the same again. I watched as Rita moved effortlessly, her dance both mesmerizing and inviting. The anticipation between us was electric, a silent acknowledgement of everything that had transpired. Yet, despite the intensity of the moment, there was no rush, just an unspoken understanding as we enjoyed each other's presence. As the night faded into early morning, Rita's laughter filled the space, light and infectious, easing the weight of everything that had been on my mind. It was one of those rare moments of harmony, the kind where you forget your worries, basking in the company of someone who truly gets you. Over breakfast, she playfully pointed out that my wife hadn't been particularly worried about my absence. She barely even reacted, John, Rita said with a smirk. What does that tell you? I had no answer for her. Maybe Abby had convinced herself that I was simply cooling off somewhere. Maybe she was afraid to ask. Either way, her indifference stung. Rita, ever perceptive, sensed my lingering frustration. For what it's worth, she said, stirring her coffee, I don't blame you for your reaction. After what Brad pulled with you, I'd say you were completely justified. She went on to explain that, beyond our personal situations, she was also a longtime patron of the arts. Every year, she anonymously donated $100,000 to the charity gala. But this time, she had decided to make her contribution public, to send a message to Brad. So I was right, I mused, setting down my cup. That bid really was about revenge. She shrugged playfully. What can I say? Sometimes a little theatricality is necessary. Days later I met with Abby. She sat across from me, her hands fidgeting in her lap. The future of our relationship is in your hands, she admitted, her voice quieter than usual. If you're willing to work on our marriage, go to counseling. I'll do the same. She blushed throughout our conversation, her guilt still fresh. Wendy, the therapist we were seeing, never pressed for details about my night with Rita, likely assuming it was just a retaliation against Brad. Which, in a way, it was. Surprisingly, the counseling sessions were productive. Amid all the turmoil, something unexpected happened. Abby lost her love for movies. She no longer found joy in sitting down in front of the TV, watching the romantic films she had once adored. Maybe it was a subconscious rejection of the fantasy she had let herself get caught up in. Or maybe it was her way of letting go of the past. Instead, she made an effort to join my hobbies, something she had rarely done before. As for Brad, I still held a grudge. But Rita assured me that he found the entire situation amusing. In true Hollywood fashion, he had even framed the charity auction note and hung it proudly in his office. Their marriage, unsurprisingly, didn't last. True to her word, when Rita discovered Brad's continued infidelity, she immediately filed for divorce. It was a peaceful split, and they remained on good terms, but she admitted to me that she had truly loved him. He wasn't a bad person, she confessed one night. Just, never meant to belong to one woman. She spoke of their relationship without resentment, though it was clear she had learned a painful lesson. Since then, Rita and I had maintained a playful friendship. She often teased me about the night we shared, sometimes joking that if the timing had been different, things could have turned out another way. Who knows, she'd say with a wink. Maybe once I finish filming and you're free. It was all in good humor, but the undertone of possibility always lingered. Now, as Abby and I approached our 10th wedding anniversary, I found myself reflecting on everything we had endured. The betrayal, the pain, the uncertainty. And yet, despite all of it, we were still here. Our marriage wasn't perfect. It never would be. But after everything, we had somehow found our way back to each other. And for now, that was enough.